Bloodsport. To paraphrase Guns N' Roses, I used to love her, but now I want to kill her. As a kid, I thought this movie was the shit. As an adult, it reminds me that kids have shit for brains. The mid to late 80s had an explosion of martial arts films being made in the US, and Jean-Claude Van Damme was easily the front runner, with this film being what skyrocketed him into mainstream success. Now, the granddaddy of American martial arts flicks is the 1973 mega classic Enter the Dragon, and make no mistake, Bloodsport is an Enter the Dragon clone with a Belgian guy as the main character. American martial arts films have always suffered from the stigma of trying to be some appropriated version of something based on Asian culture. But the truth is, all martial arts films cash in on the stereotype of hand-to-hand fighting skills reaching their apex in the Far East. And that, my friends, is a lie. Every civilization has developed advanced unarmed combat techniques and systems. The difference is, in Asia, indigenous fighting traditions are part of a cultural identity that doesn't really exist in the West for the most part. Oh, and guns and shit. Now keep in mind, Asian martial arts, regardless of what some might say, are indeed mired in mysticism. And a lot of times the true history of many of these styles are unknown, and the history that is presented by many of their practitioners is fictitious. And the claims regarding the effectiveness of many of the more traditional ones is exaggerated, to say the least. Just Google Kung Fu Master gets beat the fuck up and you'll know what I'm talking about. In martial arts movies, no matter which side of the pond they come from, really aggravate this issue because the martial arts are depicted as being so mystical they can give you superhuman-like powers. And it's why idiots to this day will take 6 months of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and then get shocked when they get floored by somebody with no formal training but's been getting into squabbles since they were 10. Now, Bloodsport is supposedly based on the experiences of a man by the name of Frank Dux. And I say supposedly because he's widely regarded as one of the biggest charlatans in the martial arts community. Frank claimed to be a soldier in Vietnam where he received the Medal of Honor, and that he really fought and won in the tournament that Bloodsport is based off of, where he set like 50 plus world records and had an overall fighting career of 321 wins, 7 draws, and only 1 loss, which would make him second only to Floyd Mayweather. Frank also claimed to practice ninjutsu, and the study of the ninja arts is arguably the most notorious for being full of Class A bullshitters. Not saying all practitioners are, but it is like walking blindfolded through a cow pasture. Running into some bullshit is inevitable. However, Bloodsport came out before Frank was exposed as a fraud, so the public at the time really thought this dude was the badassest fighter alive based off of this movie. Since then, Mr. Dukes has been called out more than the letter I at a bingo hall. This movie really does remind me of how easy it is to get drawn into something with paper-thin reasons to give a fuck, because this is the plot. Military guy goes AWOL to compete in a super secret no-holds-barred tournament called the Kumite. That's it. Now, the large majority of all martial arts films have pretty basic stories, but for Christ's sake, the plot of The Karate Kid is Shakespearean compared to this. But let's keep it a buck, you're here for the fights, and there's nothing wrong with that. On a side note, it's pretty obvious that many elements of early fighting games like Street Fighter II and Fatal Fury were inspired by Bloodsport, but Mortal Kombat was directly influenced by Enter the Dragon, so it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing. Now, in the movie, Frank attends the Kumite as a representative of his instructor's school, which is pretty typical in real life for a martial artist entering a competition. But the twist is, with his school, the high-level techniques can only be passed down from father to son, and the son is dead. But Frank convinces his master to make him the heir of his branch of Tanaka clan ninjutsu. And with Jean-Claude being the messiah of this Kung Fu Bible, he does all the magic karate guy stuff you would expect, like pulverizing a brick below 4 others that don't get damaged at all, taking full force kicks to the ribs without flinching, and shutting out all outside stimulation while in the stripper preps for work stance. The film takes place in Hong Kong with the exception of the very beginning, which is an opening montage. There are a couple minutes of Frank escaping the military base, visiting his sensei who appears to be dying or at least very sick, and a flashback of how he met his teacher in a training montage. It's not like the general location should be that relevant, but they seem to display the foreign nature of the locale cinematically to put some body on a pretty anorexic story. There is a janky nature to this movie, and that jankiness is a bit of condemnation on all American martial arts movies from that era. In many cases, their Asian counterparts are either purposely making cookie cutter plots like old school Shaw Brothers type flicks, or they actually have intriguing storylines like the Zatoichi or Lone Wolf and Cub movies. But most of these American films were trying to cash in on what at the time was called yellow fever. Look, it's not my fault the 70s and 80s were racist as fuck. But my point is that many of these films clearly understand that American audiences want a cinematic experience, so they can't be cut and paste like Hong Kong flicks, but they don't have the sensibilities to make hand-to-hand combat films as cinematically engaging as they could be. And that's outside of the fact that the fight choreography in a lot of the Asian flicks was much better than anything that Hollywood was putting out. So the result is a trend for American fighting movies at the time that have kind of a dollar store quality to them that doesn't exist in all of them, but if you're a fan of the genre, it's hard to not recognize. Getting back to Bloodsport, there's a lot to be said about this film, but very little of it is good. So remember when I compared this to Enter the Dragon? The problem with that comparison is that Enter the Dragon actually had a developed story and set of characters which can be shallow at times, but is still pretty intriguing. That is not the case with Bloodsport. First, let's start with the low-hanging fruit. Like shit 80s music, some noticeably bad dub-overs, and my favorite, what I think is supposed to be an Arab guy with a gold tooth. Next, we have the nosy-ass reporter who keeps asking about the kumite to Asians who don't say anything. But of course, the two Americans and their liaison, for some reason, decide to jabber on about it for an entire hotel lobby to hear, including the nosy-ass reporter. This lady is the type of person in a horror flick that hears about a house that people go into and never come out of, and is like, I'm gonna get to the bottom of this. She gets jammed up by the so-called Arabian guy with the gold tooth, but Van Damme steps in to save her with his karate powers. And later, his wiener. And the black dudes in this film, oh my God, the black dudes. I really have no joke good enough about how awful they are portrayed. Even Forrest Whitaker is such a bumbling dumbass, he can't figure out how to use chopsticks or just say fuck it and use a fork. But I have to shout out this one character, Paco. He is the shit and should have been the real main character, even if he has absolutely no lines. This guy was a Muay Thai practitioner in real life, and his skill shows. In fact, the fight choreography is kind of what saves this film, as while it's far from the best ever, it's still pretty decent for the most part. However, I have to mention Van Damme's toolbox of fighting moves. But before I do, I have to preface by stating Van Damme was legitimately trained in martial arts and apparently competed in Europe at a high level, and based off his technique, I can totally see that being the case. But Van Damme has three signature moves. What I call a back and forth kick, a jumping split kick, and a splitting nut punch. These appear in a number of Van Damme's movies, and there's a corniness to them that I usually only associate with the Christian versions of hip hop and death metal. Now, the bad guy of this movie is Chong Li, played by the well-known actor Bolo Yeung. Yeung appeared in a number of martial arts films, but from what I can tell, he actually started off as a bodybuilder before getting into film and was not a martial artist. Bolo was actually in Enter the Dragon, and in Bloodsport, he rips a line directly from that movie said by Bruce Lee. I'm hoping that's an homage, but who knows? Now, as a character, Chong Li is the bad guy because he won the last tournament and killed a guy, which he does in this one. And he's not really impressed by the Belgian underwear model. Being a movie based on a martial arts tournament, there really is not much else of a story. Besides the fights, it's mostly a couple of government agents trying to apprehend Frank in order to bring him back to the US in the most amateur manner possible. And the nosy reporter ends up weaseling her way into the Kumite by essentially acting like an escort. Once our reporter sees the brutality of the tournament, she becomes what they call white girl shocked. And finally, there's Frank's somewhat sidekick. This guy is really just some brawler who doesn't really fit with the rest of the fighters and is played by a guy most well known from the Revenge of the Nerds movies. He ends up fighting Chong Li, who out of spite for Frank, puts him in the hospital, and this gives Frank the motivation to put Chong Li down in the finals. The match between Frank and Chong Li is pretty typical for a film of this type. Frank gets in the first good shots, and it looks like he has this fight in the bag. But wouldn't you know, the bad guy not wanting to take a L does some bad guy shit and blinds Frank, whose reaction is comical to say the least. To say the most, it's the look every guy gets when they take a leak and realize that when they took a shower earlier, they got soap in their pee hole. But Frank, being the ninja badass he is, centers himself and finds his eye of the tiger using his ultimate karate guy power, fighting without the need of sight. This is a real kids don't try this at home moment, and I'm pretty sure this scene has gotten at least 10 people put in the fucking ER. So Frank wins the fight and the Kumite, and the film ends with a shot of him about to board a plane back to the States and a caption of some highly dubious world records set by him. Because as I said at the beginning of this video, a lot of the martial arts community thinks like 75% of what Frank Dux has ever said is a complete fabrication. Now, I imagine a lot of you at this point are thinking, well, damn, it's a martial arts flick, so why are you ripping into something that was not meant to be on the same level of its contemporaries like Wall Street? Well, here's why. Comedies such as Trading Places, which came out in '83, and Coming to America, which came out the same year as Bloodsport in 1988, are not these super deep stories, but as movies, they are still well made from a cinematic standpoint. So my question is, does a film that leans heavily on a particular device, such as humor or action, just get a pass for being vapid and underwhelming on retrospect? Because I don't think it should, and my argument in this case is a film that I mentioned earlier in this video, The Karate Kid, which came out 4 years before Bloodsport. Now, based solely off the fight choreography, this movie is far from elite, and when comparing the two, Bloodsport is definitely on top. But as an actual movie experience, The Karate Kid is clearly superior with its hero's journey and performances ranging from the relatively well done, as in the case of Daniel, Johnny, and Ali, to the stellar ones by Miyagi and the Cobra Kai leader. So to me, that movie's like cold pizza. As good, if not better, than the initial experience. Bloodsport is like cold McDonald's, which is the rating I'm giving it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. If not, hey, at least you made it this far.